Welcome. I am so grateful that you're here, that you've decided to spend some time with me while we rethink nutrition and we develop a roadmap to grow healthy kids. This talk began percolating in my mind many years ago when I was a teacher and I saw what my students ate and I saw how what they ate affected their behavior. And then later, when I saw what my own children ate and how it affected their behavior. But before I get ahead of myself, I want to take a minute and share a little bit of my story. Some of you know me as a math teacher. I used to teach at our local high school and the middle school. But my journey to become a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner started long before I was a teacher. I actually, out of college, was headed to medical school. I wanted to return to my hometown, become a family practice physician, and help people get well in my community. But I realized as I began applying to medical school that I was going to be trained in acute care, broken bones, heart attacks, that sort of thing. And I was also going to be trained in chronic care, which I prefer to call sick care, which meant prescribing medications to take care of symptoms rather than fixing underlying problems. And I wasn't interested in that. Back then, people really just wanted to go to the doctor and they wanted to get a magic pill to fix whatever it was that they were facing. But I didn't want to just fix it with a pill. I didn't want to just patch it. I wanted to teach them how to get well. And I realized that I was not going to get that kind of education in medical school. So I didn't go to medical school. I spent the next 22 years working in insurance, teaching people how to understand their coverage, and then working in the education system, teaching my students to appreciate what mathematics can do for them. But I've always been fascinated with health. Most of the books that I've read, the podcasts that I've listened to, and the workshops that I've attended have actually dealt with health and wellness. 8 years ago, my own health began to be an issue. My husband and I were seeking to expand our family, and we had 3 miscarriages right in a row. Now, I knew that I could carry a baby successfully. After all, we had a healthy toddler. These struggles led me to see an integrative health doctor. She did a lot of tests that I had never heard of before, and to be honest, I'd never even heard of an integrative health doctor before that. One of the tests she did was on food sensitivities. I removed the foods that she said my body didn't like. A month later, we were pregnant, and I carried that baby full term, and we now have a beautiful daughter who's 6 years old. 6 months after my daughter's birth, my husband began to have some serious stomach pains. It was so hard for me to watch. He used to wrestle all the time with our son. And now that we had 2, I expected them to do much more wrestling. But the kids couldn't jump on his stomach anymore without causing him intense pain. I watched him resist many times, trying to flinch or yell at the kids because it wasn't their fault that it hurt, but it hurt. He went to doctor after doctor, took medication after medication. None of it helped. So finally, he went to a functional practitioner who also did testing, including food sensitivity testing. We started cutting out some of the foods that she suggested, and right in the middle of that process, he got confirmation from one of his physicians that he has celiac disease. So we immediately cut out gluten, and we saw an incredible change in his health. He lost some weight, the stomach pain went away, aches and pains started to diminish, things improved drastically. A few years after that, we started to notice some weird behavior in our son. He would be happy, energetic, playful, and then with a flick of a switch, he would scream, run away, throw things. It was weird. The doctor said that it was a normal kid behavior. We saw a behavior specialist because sometimes he ran away and we didn't know where he was at. And she gave us some great advice on how to handle things in the moment and how to tackle things when we could see a storm building, if we could see a storm building. But nobody could tell us what was causing these behaviors. Since food helped us a lot, we wondered if food was causing him some troubles. So we changed his diet. And he is a completely different kid now. He still has high energy. He still has all the emotions of a 9-year-old boy. But he doesn't have any more crazy flip of the switch tantrums that would leave him mute, defensive, and ready to run. All of these challenges in my own family led me to seek out FDN, or functional diagnostic nutrition. I wanted to help others take back control of their lives and their health using some of the same principles that we used to take back control of the health in our family. I still don't like medications. I think they have their place, but I think they're vastly overused in our society. And I feel the same about a lot of supplements. As an FDN, I use functional lab work, detailed lifestyle and history, and education of my clients to help them take back control of their own health. I finally found a way to help people that aligns with my values. We need to give the body what it needs and then let the body do what it does best. I didn't want my clients to have to go through the trial and error cycle that we had to go through, though. And so that's one thing that I think I take away from my clients is the need to do trial and error, and I give them a proven step-by-step plan to heal. This talk, though, is about helping parents find nutrition that will lead their children to be their best, healthiest, and most robust selves, ready to take on the world. So my goals for tonight are first, to touch on the myths in the nutrition space. Second, since there are so many myths, I want to clarify what is it we really need to feed our kids. And third, I want to give you some action steps, some snack ideas, some shopping lists, some tools and suggestions to start improving how our kids are eating. I'm hoping that if you make some of these changes, you will see your children's allergies reduce, anxiety disappear, stomach troubles go away, behavior and focus improve, and I think most kids will see a lot of improvement if they're just on the right diet. So here's the myths that we're going to touch on. The first myth is that the USDA and American Heart Association food guidelines are the best way to feed my child. The second myth is that fat is bad for us and lean meat is the best type of meat to eat. The third myth is that vegetable oils, things like canola oil, olive oil, soybean oil, etc., are healthier for me to eat than butter or animal fats, also known as saturated fats. The fourth myth is that sugar is okay in small amounts and everything is okay in moderation. And the fifth myth is that a calorie is a calorie, and when calories in equal calories out, we maintain health and weight. So let's debunk the first myth. The USDA and American Heart Association guidelines are what is best for my kids. Now, the American Heart Association dominates the nutrition conversation for our physicians. This is where they go for most nutrition information if they seek it out at all. But the trouble with these guidelines is that they use epidemiological studies to justify their recommendations. And the issue is this: epidemiological studies show association, not causation. They cannot show causation. And the trouble is that association shows that two things move in the same direction, but it doesn't mean they're related at all. For example, on a hot day, we see temperatures go up, and then we see increased ice cream go up. So as the temperatures get hotter, people eat more ice cream. Well, the trouble is, when it is hotter, that doesn't mean that it is causing people to eat more ice cream. There is an association. They are trending in the same direction, but one doesn't cause the other. Or even worse, think about it the other way. Eating more ice cream causes it to be hot outside. Here's another association for you that has some problems. People who eat fruits, and vegetables have a lower risk of heart disease or any disease, and therefore eating fruits and vegetables causes disease to be lower. That's not true. There's actually some studies that show that consuming fruits and vegetables increases the risk of disease. So they might be associated, but we can't say they're causal because there are other studies that show that the reverse is true. Now, I'm not saying don't eat your fruits and vegetables, but I am saying that basing the guidelines off of correlative studies means that we're often making recommendations to change behaviors towards or against things that aren't actually connected. So what are these guidelines? Well, to begin with, they say to follow a healthy dietary pattern and eat nutrient-dense foods. The first guideline says focus on those nutrient-dense foods by eating whole, real foods. Check. I agree with this one. The second guideline says to eat lean proteins. That's false. And also to eat low-fat and fat-free dairy. That's double false. We'll go into why a little bit later. The third guideline says to limit calories from added sugars. I suppose limiting is better than eating all we want, but we really should be striving for eliminating calories from added sugars, not just limiting them. And I'll go into why about that a little bit later as well. The fourth guideline says to limit saturated fat. This is a terrible idea for our kids, and I'll make a case for that later too. The fifth guideline says to reduce sodium intake. Now, if our kids are not eating a whole bunch of processed foods, then this is also a terrible idea. Salt, which is more than just sodium, is critical for our cells to communicate. Without enough of it, our kids might feel tired, have headaches or muscle weakness, nausea, vomiting, irregular heartbeats, confusion, lightheadedness, changes in blood pressure, numbness and tingling, or even seizures. Now, if they're eating a diet full of highly processed foods, then they probably get plenty of salt in those foods. But the point is, this recommendation should apply to everyone. And if you're not eating highly processed foods, then you definitely don't need to reduce your sodium intake or your salt intake. The sixth guideline is that we should customize and enjoy food and beverage choices. Okay, so maybe that's all right. But my question is soda considered a customized beverage? Because it's full of sugar and toxins that don't do our bodies any good. What about chips? Are those considered a customized food? Well, they're full of unhealthy fats that push us towards disease. And so, while all of the rest of these guidelines are really quite specific, this one is incredibly vague. And so I find it rather worthless. So, where do these guidelines come from? Well, they debuted in 1980, designed to help Americans make healthier choices. The current version that we're using was published in December of 2020, recommended by 13 professionals, and we'll use them until December of this year, 2025, when they publish the new guidelines. But my question for you is this: are they working? Are we better off using the guidelines? Studies show that most Americans actually follow the guidelines, but we are living shorter and sicker and more diseased lives. We spend more on health food and healthy living than most other countries, and yet we spend more on sick care and medical costs than those same countries as well. So are they working? Are we better off? I would say not. Finally, these guidelines are also very easily influenced by outside pressures. These companies that are influencing these professionals help the doctors on the panel by funding their research, giving them grants, providing educational conferences, and more. Now, here are the professionals that are on the 2020 Guideline Committee. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not saying that these 13 professionals on this committee are bad or intentionally misleading the public. I just did preliminary research, and these are the ties that I found for these committee members. And I think it's interesting that 11 of the 13 committee members had connections to big pharma, big food, and big agriculture. The committee for the 2025 guidelines has 20 people on it, with 9 of them already disclosing conflicts of interest. It seems reasonable to me to question how likely these professionals would be to say something bad about the food, drug, or agricultural companies who sponsor so much of their work, even if they're trying to be objective. If you were getting 25% of your funding from Kellogg's, say, or from the grain industry, would you say something bad about them? If you did say something bad, what are the chances that you would get that 25% of your funding back? Or would you find a way to soften your comments and not be so harsh on them? Or maybe you would just keep those comments out of the discussion altogether. So I just think it's reasonable to question. Now, what else about the guidelines? Aren't they research-based? No. Dr. Edward Archer published a paper on the lack of scientific research to support the guidelines. And he also noted that the government acknowledges this lack of research, but published the guidelines anyway. Okay, so now we have a lot of reasons to distrust the guidelines themselves, so let's go into where they're actually wrong. Well, the first guideline says to eat whole food. And this one I actually agree with. The closer that we get to food in its original state, the more nutritious that food is. The more heavily we process that food, the more nutrients are lost and the more toxins are added to that food. But guideline 2 says to eat lean protein because fat is bad for us. We're going to go ahead and discuss the low-fat, no-fat milk here too, since really this conversation is about fat. This recommendation is so absolutely insufficient for our children. Protein is good for us. Our body needs amino acids that come from protein to build all of the structures in our body. Technically, you can get some of these amino acids from plants, but if you're not strategic about it, your kids will be missing key amino acids. Protein and healthy fats, excuse me, which are nourishing foods, can reverse diabetes, alleviate a variety of mental health issues, and even stave off cancer. So the problem with this recommendation is the lean part of the recommendation. We need protein in our bodies, but we also need fats. And animal fats are the most healthy fats that we can consume. If our kids have healthy metabolisms, when their glucose and their glucagon stores run out in their body, they can switch over to using ketones without a problem. Our body makes ketones from fat, and our kids' bodies have been doing that since birth anyway. In fact, there's a recent study that shows that a mother's body begins to produce ketones in the final weeks of pregnancy to prepare the baby to use ketones as fuel. The fastest way we can wreck the metabolisms of our children is to restrict fats and replace them with carbohydrates. Now, please note, I am not talking about ketoacidosis here. We are talking about ketones. Ketoacidosis is a life-threatening condition in type 1 diabetics where sugars in the body get too high because there's not enough insulin to get that sugar out of the blood. Ketones are made from fats, and they are a healthy byproduct of the metabolism of fats. So our kids need protein and fats. Like I said, proteins become amino acids in the body, and they're used to make every structure in the body. But fats are used to create cell membranes using fatty acids in every one of the 30+ trillion cells in our body. And they are also used to make energy when we convert them to ketones. Carbohydrates, on the other hand, provide energy for the body, but nothing else. And the body can get all the energy that it needs from fats. Now, ketones, like I said, are a healthy byproduct of the digestion of fats, but the body won't access or won't make ketones if one of two things is true. If the fats are filled with toxins, the body is going to resist breaking apart those fats and releasing those toxins into the body. Likewise, if the body has high levels of glucose present habitually, the body gets out of practice at turning those fats into energies. So if there's no usable fat in the body or we're out of practice, accessing that fat, the body is going to send out a 911. It's going to tell us to eat carbohydrates to quickly get that blood sugar up. Now, the quickest way would be to break down the fats in the body, but again, if toxins are present or if we have habitually high glucose in the body will resist turning those fats into ketones and instead demand more carbohydrates. Being hangry is not a sign that we are healthy. It is a sign that we are not burning ketones and that we may have metabolic damage. This damage keeps our body from burning its own fat. And so we get hangry and our body says, eat carbohydrates now. When we eat carbohydrates, our sugars go up, then we stay high for a short time and we crash again. And that crash prompts the body to crave more sugar. While we're in a hangry state of low blood sugar and we have no ketones available or we're out of practice using them, the body can produce symptoms. Clearly, these symptoms are not going to help our children learn in school. When the body has healthy fats in the diet or healthy stored fat, now this is subcutaneous fat, not visceral fat, and the body is conditioned to use that fat, it will switch over to using fat for ketones when the glucose runs out. Ketones are actually our brain's favorite foods. There are studies that show when given a choice between glucose and ketones, the brain chooses to use the ketones. So it is good for our kids to be in ketosis. Actually, they get there most nights anyway. Our kids' bodies are little enough that they cannot store sufficient glucose and glucagon to get them through the night with enough energy. And so the body shifts over to using ketones to make that bridge through to the morning. But by avoiding eating fat or by eating a low-fat diet, we actually reduce the fuel that the body has available to turn into ketones. Despite what we've been told, fat in our food does not turn into fat in the body or in the arteries. Sugar or highly processed carbs actually turn into fat in the body or the arteries and almost immediately. There are limited amounts of sugar that our body can store as glucagon in the liver and the muscles. It keeps it there for that fight or flight response in case we have to jump up really fast and move. But most of that sugar is shunted into the fat cells almost at once. This lean meat recommendation comes from the old and wrong idea that saturated fat is bad. Now, saturated fat is often thought of as cholesterol, but they are not actually the same thing. There are subtle differences, and for the most part right now, we're just going to talk about them synonymously, but they are actually different. The idea was that consuming saturated fat could lead to heart disease. Now, I could spend hours on why this is false, but I'm just going to make 2 quick points here. First, there have been large epidemiological studies and meta-analyses that have confirmed the lack of correlation between the cholesterol you eat and the cholesterol in your blood. What that means is that the saturated fat that you eat does not turn into cholesterol in your blood that worries your doctors on your labs. This also means that you are not going to give your kids heart disease by feeding them saturated fat. Now remember, we talked about epidemiological studies being a problem when it came to the guidelines. And here I am telling you that these studies actually showed us that saturated fat isn't bad for us. And so how can I say both things at once? Well, remember when we talked about the guidelines, we talked about epidemiological studies can show association, but they cannot prove causation, and they are being used to show causation in the guidelines. In this case, though, the epidemiological studies, remember, they're supposed to be used to show correlation. Well, they show no correlation. So there cannot be causation if there is not correlation. Meaning if two things aren't trending in the same direction or trending at the same pace in opposite directions, then there's no way that one can cause the other. And that's what these epidemiological studies are showing us, is that there is no correlation between the cholesterol that we eat and the cholesterol in our blood. They don't match at all. Doctors Johnny Bowden and Stephen Sinatra, who wrote the book called Cholesterol Myth, said that cholesterol does not cause heart disease. Cholesterol levels, as currently measured, don't even predict heart disease, let alone cause it. Just like the guidelines, Many people who've pushed this diet heart hypothesis that saturated fat is bad have ties to big pharma. These companies sell the statins that we use to decrease cholesterol in the blood. So there's a conflict of interest again. In 2015, the government even said that cholesterol is no longer a nutrient for concern for overconsumption, meaning eat as much as you want, we're not worried about it. But they didn't advertise that or tell anyone that they discovered that or figured that out. In addition to saturated fat not being bad for you, all of your cells are made of fat. So do you want your cells to look like, your kids' cells to look like this unhealthy cell here on the left? Cells that are difficult to maintain their structure, which reduces their ability to absorb nutrients or to eliminate toxins and waste? Or do you want your kids' cells to look like this? To move as nature intended, bending, shifting, pulling good things in, nutrients and whatnot in, and sending bad things out? The healthier our cells, the healthier our kids. The dietary recommendations say low-fat everything, which means not enough building blocks for healthy cells in our children. Usually, we replace healthy fats like butter, lard, tallow, egg yolks with unhealthy and extremely toxic fats like vegetable oils, canola oils, soybean oil, etc. Contrary to popular belief, low-carb, high, healthy fat diets are not bad for our kids. They may even ensure that they grow up metabolically healthy. Some of the studies that have been shown to cause disease eating high fat have used unhealthy fats in those studies. And so you need to understand those studies in detail. Now, a quick lesson on cholesterol. Cholesterol is necessary for hormone production. Hormones like pregnenolone, DHEA, progesterone, testosterone, estrogen, vitamin D, which is actually a hormone, not a vitamin, bile acids, cortisol, and more. All of these hormones regulate very important processes in the body, like fight-flight response, rest and digest response, etc. Also, cholesterol is a very powerful antioxidant, one that our bodies can actually use. Many plants are touted as being high in antioxidants, but the availability of those antioxidants from plants to be used in our body is very questionable. Plants protect their resources because they can't get up and run away like an animal can. They bind those resources up in fiber, which we can't digest, or they hide those resources behind toxins, which defeats the whole purpose of taking an antioxidant. Cholesterol is an antioxidant that our bodies make, though, and it's one that we can use from animal sources as well. Our children's bodies grow so much that they need lots of cholesterol to build healthy cells. And their brains, and our brains, are particularly rich in cholesterol, as it is a vital part of those cell membranes in the brain. It plays a critical role in the transmission of neurotransmitters. And cholesterol in the brain accounts for 1/4 of all of the cholesterol in the body. When cholesterol is lowered by drugs or seed oils, cellular communication is impaired, and cognition and memory are significantly affected. Serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that deals with the feelings of relaxation, well-being, and satisfaction, has receptors anchored in the cholesterol-rich lipid rafts in the cell membranes. Not enough cholesterol, not enough serotonin getting into the cells. Cholesterol also plays a big role in helping to fight infection. There was a study done over a 15-year period of time that found that people with low cholesterol were much more likely to be admitted to the hospital with infectious diseases than those with high cholesterol. Is that what you want for your kids? So let's move on to myth number 3. Fats are unhealthy. Well, only some of the fats are unhealthy. Now, I've mentioned this several times about unhealthy fats. There is ample research to show that seed oils contribute to metabolic dysfunction, which basically means dysfunction in energy production and using energy. Seed oils are a relatively recent but toxic addition to our food system. They've only been around for the last 100 years or so. And they came from companies that produced oil for lamps. And they needed to find a new market for that oil because electricity was taking off and people weren't needing lamps anymore. Procter & Gamble had cottonseed oil that they discovered they could make semi-solid by hydrogenating it. And they made it look like lard, which was the most common fat of the era. This hydrogenated oil was sold to housewives as a less expensive fat than lard, and they called it Crisco. This hydrogenation, though, produces loads of inflammation in the bodies, and our kids' bodies are little. This image shows an experiment with rats. The one on the left was fed bleached cottonseed oil, and the one on the right was fed butter. The butter rat grew at a normal rate, while the cottonseed oil rat was stunted, suffered hair loss and emaciation, and eventually developed eye problems. This is borrowed from the Ancestral Diet Revolution book, which is a great book if you haven't read it. One of the problems with seed oils is how much they oxidize, which is another word for becoming rancid. I want you to think of oxidation like broken glass. It tears up whatever it touches. Unsaturated fatty acids in the vegetable oils are much more easily damaged by high heat, and they are much more susceptible to oxidation and the production of free radicals. In other words, they turn into broken glass a lot more easily than animal fats. These oxidized fats, these seed oils, enter the body already broken, and they bounce around and tear up the body as they pass through it. Companies have to deodorize and bleach these oils in order to cover up how rancid they are. If they didn't deodorize and bleach them, we wouldn't eat them because they stink to high heaven. Saturated fats have a lot of benefits and not very many detriments. For one, they don't oxidize like seed oils. Butter is one of the few dietary sources of butyric acid, which is one of the most beneficial short-chain saturated fats. It serves as food for colon cells, helps protect against colon cancer, fights off oxidative stress, and reduces inflammation. Coconut oil, which is another saturated fat, is filled with medium-chain fatty acids, which are known as MCTs, if you see anybody selling MCT oil. And these head straight to the liver for energy, reducing the likelihood that they'll be stored as fat for later. Another issue with these seed oils is their linoleic acid content. Now, our bodies need linoleic acid and alpha-linoleic acid for healthy cells, but we don't need more than 3 to 4% of our total fats to come from linoleic acid and alpha-linoleic acid. Too much of those two fats affects the cellular structure in our bodies and also affects our organelles, causing dysfunction. Here's a chart about the content of linoleic acid in some of the most commonly used fats, again, borrowed from the Ancestral Diet Revolution book. Obviously, if we want healthy kids, we need to feed them things that support their healthy cells, because we are our cells. This chart, also from Ancestral Diet Revolution, is a little bit more detailed on these fats. So if we shift our fat consumption to more fats, but to more healthy fats, and we stay away from seed oils, we will reduce linoleic acid content in our fats to the amount that our bodies actually want. So I want you to look at these fats. Notice that safflower, sunflower, corn, soybean, canola oil are all very high in linoleic acid. And remember, we want no more than 3 to 4% of our total fats to come from these two forms of linoleic acid. But we've talked about animal fats being the most healthy, and I want to point out that lard is on this list at 20%. But I want you to also see that it's over here at 2%. And the main difference is how these pigs were raised. If the pigs were raised being fed corn and soy, because they are monogastric animals, their bodies cannot process that extra linoleic acid, and it shows up in the fat on these animals. But pigs that were raised ancestrally, meaning allowed to go out in the pastures and root around, instead of being fed corn and soy, these pigs produce the appropriate amount of linoleic acid in their fat. Notice that beef shows up at 2% and it also shows up at 3%. Beef are ruminant animals, meaning they have multiple stomachs, and it appears that ruminants can process excess linoleic acid more effectively because of their multiple stomachs than monogastric animals can. And so we are monogastric, and so that's why we have a hard time processing the extra linoleic acid, but the beef that we eat doesn't. They get rid of that extra linoleic acid and make their fat more healthy for us. If you're looking at this list thinking these are too many, I'll never remember these at the grocery store, you might try using Dr. Kate Shanahan's list from the book called Dark Calories. She calls the worst offenders of these seed oils the hateful 8. And so if you start anywhere, start by removing these hateful 8 from your diet. Now, our bodies will clear out toxins from tobacco within 6 months to a year of quitting smoking tobacco or chewing tobacco, if that damage hasn't already killed the tissue. But since our bodies uptake fats into cell structures, it can take 3 years for the toxins in the seed oils to be eliminated from the body. Did you ever think French fries would be worse than tobacco? They are from a metabolic health perspective. Now, I'm not saying go out and let your kids smoke tobacco or chew tobacco, but I do hope that you look at French fries differently than before. And again, I borrowed this from the Ancestral Diet Revolution book. Great book. Okay, so back to the myth that fat becomes fat in the body or clogs our arteries. I want to start by talking about sugar, though, but I want you to keep in mind that our bodies don't actually tell the difference between carbohydrates and sugar. In the body, the sweet stuff versus like the bread become the same thing when it's broken down by the digestive system. Both carbohydrates and sugars turn into glucose in the body. Now, the body will turn both fat and carbohydrates into fat storage for use later if we eat more of it than we need. But it is much easier to convert carbohydrates to fat because they are single use. Who can tell exactly how many bites of a Snickers bar you need to eat in order to fuel your body only without storing the extra for fat? The body works really hard to get rid of excess sugar and carbohydrates from the blood because it's dangerous to have too much sugar there. Think about ketoacidosis here. Remember, ketoacidosis happens when the blood sugar gets too high and the body can't deal with it with insulin. Well, that's why the body tries really hard to deal with it. It's because it doesn't want ketoacidosis. So the body will store that glucose as fat as quickly as it can to protect itself from the danger that sugar causes. This happens by the body pumping insulin into the blood, which forces sugar out of the blood and into the cells. But if we keep eating carbohydrates and sugar at high levels, our cells get to a point where they just can't take in any more sugar. The pancreas says, wait, there's still too much sugar in the blood. It has to get out of there. So it releases more insulin, which is akin to shouting at the cells to take in the glucose. But the cells basically keep ignoring it because they can't take in any more glucose. And that ignoring of the cells by the cells of the insulin signal is called insulin resistance. And that is a precursor to diabetes. How much fat you gain after a meal depends entirely on how much insulin is released. The higher the insulin level, the easier it is to convert that food into fat. If you eat enough sugar and carbohydrates over time, or if your kids do, you will become insulin resistant, which is a direct pathway to all kinds of disease. Insulin is typically anti-inflammatory in the right amounts, but too much of it actually becomes inflammatory in the body. Studies have demonstrated that diets constructed from protein and plenty of fibrous vegetables send satiety hormones sailing upward, while conventional food pyramid diets, which are high in grains, fruits, and vegetables, which are all types of carbs, drive up the very hormones that raise insulin and increase fat storage. By letting our kids eat gobs of processed carbohydrates and sugar, we are putting them on a train to insulin resistance and disease. Just as a self-check, if you can walk at a wall or if your kids can walk straight at a wall and their belly touches the wall before any other part of their body, there is a good chance that insulin is an issue for them. Okay, so that was myth number 3. Let's go on to myth number 4. Sugar is okay in moderation. First, I want to give you some background. Sugar is made up of 2 substances called glucose and fructose, and they show up in the ratio of 1:1 or 50-50. In our digestive system, glucose goes right into the bloodstream, and then it goes into our cells, fat cells or otherwise. But fructose goes right to the liver. In addition to going straight to the liver, fructose increases our appetites because it is devoid of nutritional value. Think micronutrients, think key building block in the cells. Fructose doesn't have any of those. Fructose is metabolized almost immediately, and it is a major cause of fat accumulation in our livers, which is a condition called fatty liver disease. This used to show up only in alcoholics, but now it's showing up in all of the population, including in our kids. Fat in the liver leads to insulin resistance as well. Studies conducted by Luc Tappy, who's a doctor in Switzerland, revealed that feeding humans a daily dose of fructose equal to 8 to 10 cans of soda produced insulin resistance and elevated triglycerides within just a few days. Now, hopefully our kids are not drinking 8 to 10 cans of soda a day. But when I watch the hallways at the high school, I would bet that most of our teens are drinking 3 to 4 cans of soda a day. Now, an adult body can manage 1 teaspoon of sugar, which is 4 grams of sugar, circulating in the body at one time. But most prepackaged snacks have way more than 4 grams of sugar. Remember, sugar and carbohydrates are synonymous here. It takes the body 1.5 to 2 hours to process consumed sugars. So that means we should never eat more than 4 grams of carbohydrates or sugar in a 2-hour period of time. While the body is trying to process these extra sugars and carbohydrates, they are causing glycation in the body, which means they're gumming up the works of the body, inserting sticky molecules in places where they shouldn't be. To give you an idea of how little 4 grams is, 1 serving of goldfish crackers is just 55 crackers, and it has 19 grams of carbohydrates. A 4-gram serving of crackers is only 11 crackers. This is 4 grams of carbohydrates, makes 11 crackers. How many kids eat only 11 crackers at one time? So this means 1 serving of goldfish crackers is handing an adult body 15 more grams of sugar than it can handle at one time, causing the body to store that sugar as fat and causing sticky damage in the body. Add to that you're hungry again a short while later, if eating the crackers even cured your hunger. It's easier to eat than it is to get energy out of fat if you're not conditioned for getting energy out of fat, or if your fat is toxic. So the body will crave more sugars right after you eat the goldfish. 1 pouch of Yoplait Go-Gurt is even worse. 1 tube has 26 grams of carbohydrates, with 17 of those coming straight from sugar. That's 22 more grams than an adult can handle at one time. You would have to stop eating the Go-Gurt pouch at only 1/6 of the pouch to stay within the limits of what the body can handle. And who does that? Even worse than Go-Gurt or goldfish is drinking your carbohydrates or sugar. This is a surefire way to stoke sugar addiction and to overeat. Add to that the consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages is strongly linked to pediatric asthma and bronchitis. 1 cup of orange juice contains 27 to 36 grams of sugar, which is the same as eating 3 to 4 large oranges, but it's not nearly as filling because there's no fiber or very little fiber in the cup of orange juice. We should never or rarely let our kids drink their sugar. Not in soda, not in fruit juice, not in rehydration drinks like Gatorade, and don't fall for the 0 grams of sugar drinks either. Fake sweeteners like aspartame, maltodextrin, or dextrose are harmful in other ways, even if they don't cause an insulin spike. In our house, we don't have dessert except on special occasions, birthdays or some holidays, some celebrations. We don't drink juice, sodas, Gatorade at home, and we rarely let the kids drink them away from home. Sometimes my husband and I feel like sugar Nazis, but it makes a huge difference in the behavior of our kids when we reduce sugar to rarely consumed. Now, I can imagine that as a teacher, how many more of my students would have learned more, how much more they would have learned if their snacks were whole, real foods, devoid of added sugars and processed carbs. Not to mention if their breakfasts, lunches, and their milk were devoid of added sugars and carbohydrates. So I want to circle back to glycation here. A simple example of glycation is wrinkles. Excess blood sugar sticks to our most abundant protein in our body called collagen. When collagen gets sticky, its shape is contorted and it leads to wrinkles. But sugar doesn't just stick to collagen. Oxidative stress from sugar reduces our body's ability to make collagen, which is needed for support in our cells. Collagen-deficient cells can be seen in cellulite fat. Another place that sugar gums up the works is acne. Studies have shown that individuals with acne have higher insulin levels than those without. Also, people with acne have been shown to have a higher burden of oxidative stress and mitochondrial damage. This directly impacts your child's ability to create and use energy. Remember broken glass? Well, when fructose enters the body in high levels, it depletes ATP in the cell. ATP is just the energy unit in the body. So it depletes ATP in the cell and it generates uric acid as a byproduct, which causes oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction. To translate that, fructose gets rid of the energy in the cell, spits out a whole bunch of toxins, causing stress on the body and damaging the energy factories in the cell. Is your child struggling with acne? What is he or she eating? Another study showed that every additional 18 milligrams per deciliter of fasting glucose was associated with a 37% increased rate of developing depression. We have an epidemic of depression in our youth today. Perhaps it's related to food. Now, I'm not saying that food is the cause of depression, but certainly giving the body proper nutrients will help to ease the stress that may be contributing to depression. How about fatigue, migraines, sinusitis, low tolerance to pain? All of these are linked to higher glucose levels and to oxidative stress in the body. Tension headaches? These are linked to excessive peaks and valleys in blood sugar. Here's a list of conditions linked to poor energy production or oxidative stress, think broken glass, in our kids. Remember, the myth was that sugar is okay to have in moderation. The trouble with limiting calories from sugar, though, is that sugar makes it nearly impossible to actually limit those calories. Sugar is the #1 food with addictive potential. And when we mix that with salt, fat, and flavors in more quantities than nature could possibly make, which is the case for most ultra-processed foods, we have created products that light up the dopamine and opioid pathways in the brain. These are the same pathways activated by recreational drugs. The bottom line, don't be tricked into thinking that sugar is fine in moderation. Just a little might not do as much damage as a lot, but the caveat is most of us can't stop at just a little. Dwight Lundell, who's a physician, and he wrote the book Cure for Heart Disease, says that high sugar intake trains our brain's reward centers to make us eat more and more sugar. And remember that to the body, all sources of carbohydrates become glucose, also known as sugar in the body. The idea of moderation is great in theory, but what if we applied it to other things? Would you let your kids have a little cocaine because everything is okay in moderation? How about meth? Of course not. These are drugs, and we know it. They're addictive drugs that make the body respond in perhaps desirable ways in the moment, but they're detrimental to our health over the long term. Sugar and ultra-processed foods are just as addictive as many drugs on the market, yet we let our kids have access to them whenever they want and eat however much they want, encouraging and reinforcing that addiction. Now let's go back to the guidelines, the American Heart Association guidelines. These are not that different from the USDA's guidelines. The American Heart Association says to choose whole grain carbs instead of refined carbohydrates. The trouble is, most commercial products that are made with whole grains don't actually contain all that much whole grain at all. They don't even have to have more than 1% of their total grains in their product be from whole grains in order to call it a whole grain product. Now, real whole grain products like Ezekiel 4-9 breads, which you can find at a local health food store, are way better than processed whole grain breads. If you must eat carbohydrates, then eat true whole grains. These are the lesser of two evils, but we're better off eating natural carbs. Those are the carbs from whole fruits and vegetables rather than from grains. The processed grains and pseudo-whole grains are called simple carbs, and they cause a rapid increase in sugar and then a rapid decrease in sugar. That's this blue line right here, a rapid increase in sugar and a rapid decrease in sugar. The trouble is this rapid decrease scares the body into thinking we're in a very bad state of energy, and it causes the body to eat more carbohydrates. The complex carbs, those from leafy greens and fibrous fruits, can cause a pretty similar elevation in blood sugar, but it's not quite as extreme. So this guy here goes up almost as high. But notice that the crash is more slow and gentle, so it doesn't usually prompt us to go eat a whole bunch of sugar afterwards. All carbohydrates in the body are created equal, so they are all going to raise blood sugar. But it is a whole lot easier to overeat carbohydrates in cake, chips, and bread than it is to overeat carbohydrates in broccoli. Now, in order for us to eat grains, they have to be heavily processed to consume them. But beyond the processing, foods like corn, soy, and sugar beets have also been genetically modified. Have you ever heard of GMOs? That's a rabbit hole that I am not going to go down too far in this talk because I could spend hours here. But suffice it to say that some genetic modifications can cause serious harm in the bodies. The industry knows it, our government knows it, but trying to get them to change the regulations surrounding these GMOs is like swimming upstream. For example, swimming upstream, on January 15th, the FDA announced a ban on red dye number 3 from foods. Now, they banned it from cosmetics 35 years ago because they know it causes ADHD and some cancers. But it took 35 years to ban it from our food supply. And we still don't know how long they have given the industry to actually remove it from the food supply. As an anecdote about GMO corn, 92% of our corn in the United States is GMO. And this corn has been modified to have the pesticide right inside the seed. This pesticide causes the stomachs of the bugs who eat it to explode when they eat it. Ever wonder what it's doing to your kids? Now, some people say the Bt gene is safe for humans because it doesn't bind to our stomach lining the same as bugs. But are you willing to chance that with your children? Especially with an epidemic of leaky gut in our country? There are so many substances that are thought of as generally recognized as safe or GRAS. The trouble is, this GRAS designation is determined by the very people who stand to make a profit selling that chemical. It seems reasonable to me that those companies have very few reasons to be transparent about their substances and the real harms that those substances cause. Okay, enough about GMOs and toxins. Let's talk about ultra-processed foods. I first want to talk about the distinction between ultra-processed foods and just processed foods. Dr. Stephen DeVries, who's a preventative cardiologist and the executive director of the Gaples Institute in Chicago, defines ultra-processed foods this way. Ultra-processed foods are industrial creations made with little, if any, whole foods that often contain large amounts of added sugar and salt. They are typically infused with artificial colors and additives. These are foods like fatty, sweet, and savory or salty packaged snacks, ice creams, frozen desserts, sodas, and other carbonated energy or sports drinks, canned and packaged soups, breads, buns, breakfast cereals and bars, sweetened juices, margarines and spreads, infant formulas and drinks. Yes, I did say infant formulas are ultra-processed, and meal replacement shakes. The more processed the food, the less nutrition that it has, and the more damage to your body that it causes. Now, the brand names in these lists are just examples of brands of this type of food. There are many more examples in each category. And I borrowed these lists from a book called Good Energy, written by Dr. Casey Meads. In addition to lacking nutrients, many ultra-processed foods have seed oils. Non-dairy creamers are some of the worst. Margarines, cake mixes, ramen or cup of noodles, almost all packaged baked goods, Twinkies, etc., donuts, breakfast cereals and bars, cookies and fast foods, they all have seed oils in them. A study through the NIH proved that ultra-processed foods make you hungrier, make you eat more, and make you gain weight. Now, Dr. DeVries says that processed foods are much more nutrient dense than ultra-processed foods. They are usually less refined, and they have few or no additives. They are generally healthier than their ultra-processed counterparts. These are foods like freshly made bread, ham, bacon, tinned fish, cheese, fresh fruits or frozen fruits and vegetables without added ingredients, nut butters without seed oils or sugar, nuts and seeds, unsalted and unsweetened, frozen meat, canned fish, canned vegetables without salt, beans, and no salt or low salt broths. The last myth we need to discuss is myth number 5, that a calorie is just a calorie. Now, if we give it some thought, we know how wrong this is from the standpoint of health. True, in a chemical equation, energy in, and calories are just a form of energy, must equal energy out. But it doesn't serve us to think that if we just exercise enough or cut enough calories, that we can eat sugar in moderation and still finally lose that weight. Now, I'm not going to deep dive into weight loss here because this is a conversation about the health of our kids. But all calories are not created equal in the body. Realistically, 1 calorie from chocolate is the same energy in the body as 1 calorie from hamburger. But do we think we can just eat only chocolate in the right number of calories and expect to be healthy? The nutritional value of hamburger is far superior to the nutritional value of chocolate. To start with, if we ate only chocolate, our body would turn on our hunger hormones because it is not getting what it needs. It wants nutrients. When we starve the body by eating unnutritional food, the body will store away those extra calories to maybe use later, but it is going to ramp up the hunger cues because it doesn't have what it needs to build cells. If you are constantly hungry, or your kids are constantly hungry, you don't need more willpower to avoid the food, and you certainly don't need to increase calories, or likely you don't need to increase calories. You need to figure out what nutritional building blocks are missing from your diet. If the body has enough energy from carbohydrates or fats, but remember fats are multi-purpose, then our hunger is not caused by not enough energy, but by not enough nutrients. When we eat whole foods, an interesting fact or cool fact is that the body burns double the calories as when we eat ultra-processed foods. Whole food nutrients are, in order to get at the whole food nutrients, our bodies have to do more work because they're packaged more tightly in the food product, and work burns energy. Ultra-processed foods, however, if they have any nutrients at all, those nutrients are already unwrapped, if you will, and so it doesn't take the body much work to get at them. So the body then boxes up the leftovers and stores it as fat around the body. Since the body didn't get the nutrients it wants, though, it's going to ask you to eat more food, hoping that the next bite will have nutritional blocks that the body needs. Then, to add on to that, Big Food hired the chemists from the tobacco industry to help them make food more addictive. Not only are ultra-processed foods devoid of nutrients, they are also filled with substances designed to make you eat more. They're designed to give you a dopamine boost so that you'll reach back into that bag and grab another chip. In almost all cases, the foods that our kids should be hungry for are in the fridge or on the counter, not in the pantry. But the food that they can't leave alone is chemically engineered to trap them in an eat more cycle to make more money for food companies. This isn't malicious on the part of the food companies. It's just good business. The more of it you eat, the more of it they sell. Okay, so that's all really depressing. Big Food is out to get us. Government and nonprofit agencies that are supposed to watch out for us are heavily influenced by funding from Big Food and Big Ag. So where do we go now? How do we navigate this mess? Well, the ideal way is to feed our kids only nutrient-dense and necessary food for their healthy growth. But I realize that ideal is not always practical. My belief is that the practical way is to make sure the food you provide regularly, meals and snacks, is as nutrient-dense as possible. Reserve those frivolous foods in terms of nutritional value or detrimental to our health for times when the benefit isn't nutrition, but is emotional or social, birthdays or other celebrations, for example. Is this the perfect way to do it? No, but we also have to contend with social norms. You have to help your kids understand that toxins in small amounts and in small frequency, meaning not every week and certainly not every day, can be tolerated by the body, but only if we consume them rarely. The toxic load will eventually overwhelm the body if we ingest those toxins, those bad foods, regularly. To start with, we need to reconnect with the body's ability to say what's good for us. Pay attention to taste. If you are feeling good while you eat a food, and then you still feel good 2 to 3 hours after you eat that food, then it's likely that that food is good for you. If you aren't in a rut, the things that your body doesn't want, it will tell you. Chocolate, for example, tastes great when I eat it, but 2 to 3 hours later, I just want more, and I start to get crabby because of the sugar crash. Along these same lines, don't force your kids to eat plant matter that they don't like. There's 2 reasons for this. The first reason is that evolution restricts the amount of plant matter that we can process. That amount of plant matter is determined by the colon's capacity to process fiber. Per Dr. Anita Tagore, plant foods have lower levels of nutrients than animal foods do, and they also impede the absorption of nutrients from animal foods. It's possible that your child's colon just can't handle more plants at that time or wants more time with the good quality foods to extract nutrients from them. Fatty meat, higher in calories, vitamins, minerals, with few or no toxic substances, has no anti-nutrients, which are simply substances that inhibit the absorption of other nutrients, and it's easier to chew and easier to digest than plants. So if your kids are eating all of their fatty meat, encourage them to try the fruits and vegetables, but don't force them to clean their plates. Contrary to popular belief, they don't get many nutrients from the plants anyway. As a side note, I love my doctor, and I love the doctor of my kids, and I respect them both. But very few doctors are trained in nutrition. Most get less than an hour of nutrition classes in medical school, and many don't even get that much. In addition, many dietetic schools are funded by big ag companies who get large government subsidies to grow more plants. So just like the Kellogg's example, dietitians are trained in their schools that agricultural products are more beneficial than meat because the funders of those schools paid for their curriculum. It's not what the science shows. Now, I know this point is controversial, and if you check in the notes afterwards, you can find my references for my claims there. So, contrary to popular belief, eating the rainbow of plants is not required for healthy kids. Now, the second reason to not force your kids to eat vegetables is that it is common for the bodies to dislike certain foods because those foods cause our own body distress, and we know that intuitively. By forcing your kids to eat foods they don't like, you counter-program their intuition and create unhealthy relationships with food. That's, of course, assuming they're not stuck in a rut. Watch their behavior while you're watching how you feel, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours after they eat, and see how they behave. If they're irritable, hyperactive, they've lost focus, they're easy to temper, these can all indicate foods that are hurting your kids and not helping them. Now, I'm not saying don't present plant foods to your kids, but try. I'm just saying don't force them to eat them. If they're continuously saying they don't like broccoli, make it for the rest of the family. Encourage them to taste it now and again, but don't force them to eat it. Maybe broccoli is something that their body sees as a toxin. I often find that this is true when I test for food sensitivities. Most people who have a food or two that they don't particularly care for actually have a sensitivity to that food. Now, healthy foods are really quite simple, even if they're not super easy. So where do we begin? Well, first, I want you to shop on the outside of the grocery store. Shop the meat section, the dairy section, shop in the fruits and vegetables section, and maybe detour down the frozen produce section. Second, don't fear fat. Add lots of healthy fats to your diets and to the diet of your kids. Be liberal with the butter and sparing with the mayonnaise and processed peanut butter. Third, increase your protein intake. Adult women under 5 feet tall should eat 55 to 80 grams of protein a day. Adult men under 5 feet 4 should eat 65 to 90 grams of protein a day. Those values get higher the taller that we get, and most adults don't even get this close. Now, these are numbers for short adults, but they give us a place to extrapolate for our kids. Then you say, wait, isn't high protein hard on the kidneys? No, it's not. Only if we already have kidney disease. If you're healthy, high protein is perfectly okay. Now, I am not a big fan of counting macros. If eating healthy is too much work, we won't sustain it. But as a reference point, we should be eating 1 gram for 1 pound of body weight in protein. This means that 150 pound, oh, sorry. This means that a 150 pound adult should be eating 4.5 cans of tuna a day, or 5 chicken breasts, or 25 eggs a day. Now, obviously, eating 25 eggs a day doesn't sound that appealing, but the idea here is just to show you quantities. Are you or your kids eating enough protein? As a society, we are not. Now, I've looked at what kids eat at lunch, and their protein consumption is really low. I am not saying that they're not served enough. I haven't counted it, but I have watched what they eat. And most kids eating school lunch or eating home lunch eat most of the carbs and the sugar, and they leave the protein behind. So now fat, how much fat do we need a day? Well, we should eat no less than 0.3 grams of fat per pound of body weight. That means you need to add 3.5 tablespoons of butter or extra virgin olive oil to your meals throughout the day. Now remember, animal fats are the best type of fat that we can eat. They have the perfect ratio of alpha-linoleic acid and linoleic acid. If we have to go to plants, go to coconut oil or extra virgin olive oil. But make sure you're buying extra virgin olive oil. That is the only way to make sure that that oil is not adulterated, which means mixed with seed oils. 69 to 73% of grocery and restaurant olive oils in the United States are adulterated. They are mixed with seed oils. This is per the IOC's sensory standards for extra virgin olive oil. If you're going to buy olive oil, buy it in a dark glass container or buy it encased in a box and keep it in a dark cupboard to keep it from oxidizing too fast. Because light speeds up oxidation, meaning light exposure makes the oil rancid faster. Well, what about nuts? Nuts are high in fats. Yes, but nuts are also high in linoleic acid, which oxidizes well. Some nuts are probably fine, but it's best to try to eat nuts with lower linoleic acid content and try not to make them your primary source of fats. I borrowed this again from the Ancestral Diet Revolution. Notice that macadamia nuts are the only nut that has in that sweet spot of less than 4% linoleic acid. And the rest of the nuts have lots and lots of linoleic acid. But I have a picky eater, you say. Well, a chef for the rich and famous says that picky eaters are often stuck in a sweet and salty rut. If texture isn't their issue, add a little bit more flavor to help get them out of that rut. But the flavors need to be in the sour, bitter, or umami zones, meaning savory zones. He suggests adding a seasoning called pluck, or adding sauerkraut juice to their ketchup. Mix it in with their ketchup to start with. This will begin to reactivate all their taste buds, and it'll help them to be open to trying more foods. Now, continuing our list of ways to get started. Number 4, learn to read the labels. The ingredients are listed in quantity order on a label. The first thing on the list was used the most in making that product. The second was used the second most, etc. As a rule of thumb, if you can't pronounce more than 1 or 2 ingredients on that label, you probably shouldn't put that food in your body. The fifth thing to do is to restrict sugar as much as you can while teaching your kids to limit sugar on their own. Help them recognize when their bodies are out of control and help them link back to the foods that they ate. Now, this only works if you've actually had your kids take a break from those foods. Remember that sugar is toxic, but our culture is addicted to it. Help your kids not foster that addiction. But because it's an addiction, reducing the quantity can cause withdrawal symptoms, just as if they were addicted to cocaine. In fact, sugar has been shown to be more addictive than cocaine. Dr. Adi Jaffe, who specializes in addiction recovery, says that every client he's ever had who has successfully recovered from a drug and alcohol addiction, but is now trying to ditch the sugar, says that quitting sugar is harder than quitting drugs or alcohol. So what should we eat? Well, again, start on the outside of the grocery store as much as possible. Buy frozen fruits and vegetables, organic when possible. It has nothing on the label except for that food. Frozen fruits and vegetables actually have a higher nutrient density because they're picked ripe and flash frozen. Did you know that fresh picked spinach has 100% of its vitamin C when it's picked, but a week later in the store, that vitamin C can be 0? Once it's harvested, every day out of the soil means that the nutrient values in that food are declining. An average piece of food travels 1,500 miles to reach our plates, losing valuable nutrients along the way. Another trick is to buy good meat in bulk if possible. We have a local store here who gives a great discount if you're willing to buy meat in bulk and package it on your own. We buy tri-tips and flank steaks by the case and freeze them individually at home. Our salesperson there gives us a great discount on 70-30 burger or 75-25 burger if he doesn't have to package it up in 1 and 2 pound packages. We buy bacon and sausage by the case too because they're cheaper that way. And if you live in a community where there's cattle ranching around, lots of local ranchers will sell you half or a whole beef if you have room in your freezer to store it. If you don't have that, buy wild caught or canned fish like salmon instead of fresh fish to save money. Wild caught is much healthier than farm raised and has much fewer toxins. Eggs, most of the time, are an inexpensive way to get extremely nutrient dense food. Hard boil them, scramble them, fry them. Those are all good ways to cook them. They are a complete source of protein in that they contain all the essential amino acids. Protein powders can be a great way to supplement protein. Choose organic and grass-fed or regenerative farm if you're getting an animal-based protein powder. Be sure it has minimal ingredients, no added sugars, no colorings, no natural or artificial flavors, no gums, no ingredients that you aren't familiar with. I like to mix protein powder into a cup of unsweetened yogurt. It gives a boost of protein and lets me eat the yogurt without all that sugar and gunk. If you are a bean or lentil person, buy them in bulk and cook them in large batches in a slow cooker. Then you have ready-made burritos or beans available for burritos on hand most of the time. Buy nuts in bulk and raw if possible, and toast them yourself in beef tallow, pork, lard, or butter. Or if you don't want to cook them, be sure that the nuts you buy weren't roasted in seed oils. Almonds with dark chocolate bits can be a tasty snack. Apples with cheese slices or dipped in nut butters. Frozen berries can be very refreshing in the place of popsicles. Try not to let your kids eat naked carbs, meaning carbs without fat, protein, or fiber. Bananas and some other fruits have a huge carb load, so best to consume with a healthy protein or fat like nut butters or cheese. Avoid bread and chips before a meal because they spike your blood sugar and increase your hunger. Cinnamon can improve glucose levels, so add some to carrots or apples. Don't add sugar though. Our kids eat a lot of fruit, cheese sticks, pepperoni with cream cheese. Some high-fat, energy-dense foods include bacon or bacon-wrapped pickles, full-fat yogurt with protein powder mixed in, full-fat cheese, eggs, sausages, and 70% ground beef. Much of what we eat, especially if you're in a rural community like I am, is processed food. We rarely kill it and eat it right there or pick and eat it right in the garden. So when you're choosing foods, try to get the least processed that you can. Are pepperoni and sausage processed? You bet they are. Are they worse than crackers? Not in your life. Processing is on a spectrum, so the least processed, the better. Research shows that while processed meats are less healthy than cut meats, they are worlds more healthy than ultra-processed foods. We choose to have them in our diet for variety and because they're more healthy than other alternatives. Okay, so that was a lot. The best advice I can give you is just start somewhere. Pick one or two things and work on doing that to improve your diet and improve the nutrition in your lives. Maybe say, as a family, we aren't drinking sugar at home anymore. Maybe ask your kids to quit drinking chocolate milk at school. Maybe you want to start with no sugar or processed carbs in after-school snacks. Maybe you want to start by switching out your fats, getting rid of all of the vegetable oils in your cooking and switching to animal fats. Maybe you want to stop eating seed oils and processed foods. That is a much bigger bite than you might expect. Maybe these are too big and you want to start with no sugar at breakfast every day and work up to cutting out sugar or drastically reducing sugar consumption over the next several months. Maybe just start with adding more protein. When I was working to improve my intestinal health about 2.5 years ago, I started by making more and more of my plate healthy proteins and healthy fats, and I slowly stopped eating things that I was learning weren't good for me. As my body became adapted to using fat that was always around, I began to feel so much better. I had to fast for 36 hours recently during this past holiday season for a medical procedure, and I never once got hangry, and I guarantee that wouldn't have happened 3 years ago. Yes, I got hungry, but not like I expected. I didn't have the shakes that I used to get when I was low on fuel. I didn't get the brain fog that I used to get. I didn't get crabby. So take this information and start somewhere. One of my goals, and one of the reasons for this talk, is that I'm hoping with more parental education, we can change how our kids in our schools fuel themselves during the day. First with classroom snacks, then with the food that they eat for breakfast or for lunch. It's a big goal for sure, but our kids are worth it. Now, if you didn't get a chance to look at it, check the notes at the bottom for a grocery comparison list. These compare healthy food versus food that we think is easy or cheapest. You'll see that the lists are actually quite comparable on a per serving basis. And I'm sorry for those of you online, but in my public talk, I'm offering snacks so that people can taste different foods. These snacks include pepperoni with cream cheese, salami and cheese, lunch meat rolled around cheese, fruits and carrots, cheese sticks, biltong, which is a kind of a jerky that's made all natural, has no additives and ingredients, Power Pucks, keto bricks, pork rinds. I've got some hamburger with the different pluck seasonings included in it, and I'm not sure. I think that's the end of it. So you might try some of those and see if your family enjoys those. There are coupon codes if you go to my website at www.angelwing.com and then click on Other and then go to Recommended Products. There are coupon codes for several of the foods that I just listed. I hope that this was worthwhile for your time. And again, I thank you for joining me as I talked about healthy nutrition for our kids. If you're interested in learning more or working with Angel Wing Health to improve your health, please go to my website and book a free 30-minute discovery call to see if working with Angel Wing Health is right for you. Have a great day.